flip this open. While we do the monitor dance, I just want to say very briefly that the world of containerization is an exciting one. And you should feel excited. Although you should also feel a little bit scared, because it is actually also a little bit scary. We've been doing containers in a big way for a couple of years now, and it's taken us a while to get to where we are. We're comfortable today, but it's not something that you can just dive into and be at 100% right away. So on your journey towards containerization and eventually orchestration with the product as described here, I give you permission to start small and make mistakes. It's going to be okay. Okay. So without further ado, we'll just full screen this here. And we'll go back one. Very good. My name's Daniel. I work for a company called Datadog. In the bottom corner there is my Twitter handle. If you want to connect with me on Twitter, ask questions about anything I'm going to be talking about here, for example, feel free. I'll put this again as a slide at the end because my Twitter handle is terrible. And you will mistype it the first time. I'm going to be talking about something called the 3 pillars of observability. Now, show of hands, who has ever heard of the 3 pillars of observability? Wow, awesome. That means we get to start right at the beginning, which is good because that's what I planned. I work at a company called Datadog. The name of the dog, by the way, is Bits. Bits is very cute, and if you're interested in some stickers, I have some in my bag. Feel free to hit me up after the presentation. Datadog is this is the official line. Datadog is a SaaS-based monitoring company offering metrics tracing, APM, and logging capabilities, among other things, handling trillions of data points per day. All right, what does that actually mean? Now, a lot of times when I'm doing presentations, I put up this slide, I say the line, and then I just go on to whatever other arcane subject I was going to dive into. I'm going to do something a little different for this time around. I'm actually going to concentrate on this content. Literally, what does this mean? Right? There's a lot of words here. Some of it's buzzwordy, some of it not. But like, why? Why do we say these things? Right? So let's actually dive into that and find out why it's relevant and why it's relevant to you. Right? That's the most important thing. So I put together a small agenda. We're going to go in 2 parts. All right? First part, theory. A little bit of exposition, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of defining some terms. All right? Basically pushing a grounding for this sort of brave new world of observability and like monitoring tools, especially as you're going into the world of containerization and so forth. Along with containerization comes a whole raft of interesting new problems. And you're going to need to have the right tools, but also the right understanding of what those tools are meant to represent and execute on. And so that's what we're going to go through for the first part here. The second part is going to be a bit more practical, and that's where I'm actually going to show you the tooling. Right? What does Datadog actually, what does the service look like? What does it do? How can we use it? Let's go through some examples. Does that sound good so far? All right. So first things first, the 3 pillars of observability. That's them, these 3 words, all right? In no particular order, metrics, logs, and tracing. Now I'm going to be perfectly candid with you here. Some debate over these 3 words and what they mean. I'm going to relate to you the standard industry accepted definitions for these things, and then tell you about what they mean within the context of Datadog. There are other organizations and other people out there that have slightly different definitions of these things. They're not wrong. It's just different ways of looking at things. It's all about perspective. Fair enough? First one is metrics. Again, no particular order. Metrics is interesting because it is very simple to explain and very difficult to master as a concept. So I will explain it. A metric is a timestamp and a value. That's it. I've just explained metrics. But a timestamp and a value on its own is completely useless, right? At 4 o'clock, number 3. That told you nothing, right? What's difficult to master about metrics is their context. What's difficult to master about metrics is what they mean individually, collectively, as part of a subset, as part of a superset, over time, et cetera, et cetera. If we talk about metrics, we're not just talking about numbers, we're talking about context, cardinality, dimensions, tagging. We're talking about them through time. Metrics can tell us what's happening now, they can tell us what's happened in the past, and they can help to guide us to what's going to happen in the future, but only if we understand them and their positioning within the larger context. And that's the tricky thing about metrics, and that forms the first part of the 3 pillars of observability. Numbers through time. I know, sounds kind of, all right, we're not in a philosophy class here, but bear with me. This does have concrete underpinnings, which we'll look at in a moment. Okay for metrics so far? No questions? Good, because I wasn't going to answer them. Next one is logs. Logs is the second pillar of observability. Hands up, who's ever looked at a log? Yeah, well, everybody should be putting their hands up, right? You have not worked on a computer and not worked at a log at some point, all right? I first compiled a Linux kernel back in like 1995 and have spent an inordinate amount of time staring at log files since then, all right? Here's the thing about logs, and this is a hill I am willing to die on. Logs are emitted by events. End of story. Now, if you have logs in your environment right now, which are not emitted by events, that just have like, I don't know, sections of some sort of ugly trace stack in them, really reconsider what you're doing, because that's not helpful, all right? What's an event? An event is a discrete unit. It's a thing that happened. It has a defined start and a defined end, and something happened there. And that thing is describable by a log entry. That's what a good log is. Logs can tell you what happened, but they can only tell you the known unknowns, all right? Logs can only tell you things that you expected, or that the system expected. If something happened that the system didn't expect, will it generate a log at all? It's an interesting question. And the log it generates, does it have useful information in it? Maybe, maybe not. Logs are really great for debugging, but they're really great for debugging things you can predict. Now that's powerful, but it's not enough. This is why they're called the 3 pillars, right? That's why when we move on to tracing. Tracing is really cool. You try to think about how much stuff do I own? And where do I put it? You can also think about how do I use that stuff? How many things are colored blue, right? There's a ton of different ways to think about any one thing. What we're trying to do here is provide a series of different ways, and I have an alarm going off. That's very interesting. That's telling me to go to my team's stand-up. I think I'm going to miss it. Where's my phone? There it is.
Who names an infrastructure raclette?
We do. We do. On fait entre taboulé, uzu, raclette et bon voilà, on a quand même certains termes en français. Yeah, I speak French. So, we actually name all of our teams after food and drink for the most part. That's changing, though, over time. The encroachment of corporatization, it affects us all. Yeah, there's an Eclair team. Actually, they're really cool. Definitely, if you ever come by the office, and you should come by the office, have a drink with that team. So we try to give you a bunch of different ways to think about your stuff. Now this is very simple. It's called like a host view. And this is just looking at different ways to think about all the hosts that are in your infrastructure. So we're talking about actual machines, physical machines, VMs. The cool thing about this is that we happen to have it organized in this case by team, but you could organize it by whatever you want. You could organize it by data center, by office, by software deployment, by customer. It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you like there, right? And then all of these terms are coming from your deployments. We're actually extracting it there. What's also cool about this is that we don't really care where those machines are, right? Those machines could be in data centers, they could be in VMs, they could be in different parts of, it doesn't matter, right? It's one single interface to take a look at that. And you can actually take and you can zoom in on these things and you can click through on them to get a better view of what's going on inside them, what apps are running on them, tags that are associated with it. This one I happen to click on is running in AWS, for example, which is really cool. And you can actually dive further through here, which I'm not going to do because we don't have a ton of time. But this is one way to sort of move in and out of the infrastructure. We support almost exactly the same view, in fact, for containers. So as I said, we use a lot of containers, and so we had to build a tool for us to manage our own containers. And the same interface you see here for hosts, you have for containers as well, where you can actually just click them, sort them, move in and out of them, slice and dice them any way that makes sense to you, and have immediate context on them, which is actually really, really cool. That's kind of an infrastructure way of looking at things. which is great for ops people, and like I spend a lot of time here, which is really nice. But then they also want to look at something we call the service map. The service map is an abstraction layer. Remember we were talking about abstractions? So the service map is similar to the infrastructure view in that we're looking at objects, but instead what's interesting here is the relationships between those objects, right? So for example, we'll just take and zoom in. We've got an item here called dog pound. We can actually see the requests, latency, errors, what's flowing into it. This is all just generated from the data that's being sent to us, okay? I'm not gonna lie, you've got a little bit of work to do to make this go, all right? It's just a little bit though, right? It's okay, you're gonna read a PDF, you're gonna deploy some software, it's gonna be fine. Don't worry about it, all right? But the really cool thing about this is that this auto builds, and you can actually get a feel for how these systems are interacting right away without having to do much work, and start to get a feel for where the choke points are and where you might need to think about going forward. You know what, that database, that looks like a thing. We're gonna need to look into that, right? It's kind of a cool view, and it's just fun to play around in, especially on a sufficiently complex system where you get to zoom around it like a galaxy. That's a lot of fun too. We can probably some isolations and so on and so forth. Works really, really nicely. Questions so far? Nice. All right. We've got a couple of different ways, as I said, of looking at information. And so we were thinking about looking at containers, talking about looking at infrastructure, talking about the abstractions, which is sort of the programmatic layer, how are these services, databases, and things interacting with each other. We also have something here called a screen board. This should be relatively familiar, I think, to anybody who's ever seen a screen board. What is a screen board? This is it. The idea here is that you can build functionally dashboards, but basically containing anything you want, right? So this one in particular is monitoring an application. It's set up horizontally because we would normally display it on a television screen turned this way, as opposed to this way. And we have these set up all over the office, which is actually cool for all the different applications and things that we run. So we can see here, monitoring, in this case, our dummy application called Coffee House. And we put our KPI, number one important thing, in a big box, right in the big corner, and that's how much money are we making off the coffee, right? Yes, we are pivoting to coffee. I wasn't supposed to actually divulge that. You see average requests per second, the error rate. We can see log queries, which is actually really cool, which we'll get to that in a second. The nice part about this is that you can build whatever you want, whatever's relevant to you here. So if you're deploying a particular app, particular application, you're deploying a particular website for a particular customer, and you actually build these out programmatically, which is really, really neat. You don't have to build these by hand, although you can. You can also build these out programmatically. So as you're deploying content, as you're deploying a site, as you're deploying infrastructure, whatever you're doing, as part of those hooks, as part of those deployment processes, the Datadog API, you can just build these things right out to go along with them. The URLs are fixed, so you can actually just share these URLs. We've got good access controls and stuff around them and whatnot too. You can make them public, you can make them private, put them behind, works out super nice. This is really good for passive data ingestion, right? So you can look at a thing and immediately know where you're at, which is nice, right? If you want to dive a little bit further, however, you're going to want to, I actually didn't load that tab. You're actually going to want to take a look at a time board. Now I am loading this on my phone because I didn't get the Wi-Fi password. Oh, good, it loads quick. 4G. So this is a time board. The time board looks similar to the screen board. The difference here is that you're actually looking at things through, can anyone guess? Through time. Well done. So what's cool about this is as you scroll through it, your context is always preserved, right? So you always know what these things are. And again, these could be anything. We got trace durations, Java servlet processing time, how much memory is being used, 400s and 500s out of the ELB. Whatever is relevant to your application, in this case it's relevant to ours, you put on here, you're good to go, right? You can, actually this one's over here is really cool. Take a look at this, forecasting. This is a neat feature, right? Remember we talked about metrics, and it's important to understand metrics through time. Well, we're looking here at the past, present, and future, right? Datadog gets you this out of the box, all right, which is actually really, really cool. You can see what normal looks like going forward. So this dotted line is the median, and I put median in quotes because there's a bunch of different ways to calculate this, and that's up to you to decide what particular median looks good to you, okay? And then you can also see here, historically, what would be considered normal. So as long as you stay in there, you're good. Anything outside of that, that's strange. You're going to want to look into that. That's kind of cool. Down here, memory used, for example, we can see here that we've got a couple of spikes. Why don't we take and zoom in on that? All right, we'll take and zoom in on that, and we can see, okay. The interesting thing apart from this, of course, is that as your granularity in time changes, so does the graph change through time because math. In any case, we see that there's an interesting element here which needs to be investigated. We could take and investigate that. We'll click right on it. We could add an little annotation, ping a coworker, send a Slack message, something like that. We could actually go back and look at the hosts. We could look at the processes that were associated with this particular data point, which is actually really cool. Or we could roll forward and look at the logs. Remember I talked about logs. So we spent a lot of time there talking about metrics, functionally, right? We're talking about interpreting numbers. Now we're going to talk a little bit about interpreting logs. There is a fully featured logging interpretation component built into Datadog. Just send the logs to it. It's going to be fine. There's going to be a little structuring you're going to have to do. If you're sending logs that aren't events, fix it, because those logs aren't useful, all right? But once you've got some nice structured log action going on, once you've got some nice tagging and things set up like this all begins to mesh so nicely. It works so well. Again, I'm not going to lie to you. It's a little bit of work on your end to make sure the logs and the data you're sending is structured properly, and that's fine. But that's a one-time deal, right? With that hurdle overcome, you get a lot of power, which is really, really cool. So here, for example, we're looking at a bunch of logs. We can see the log intake over time. We can sort this and slice and dice it either by pointing and clicking, which a lot of people like, or we have up here effectively a CLI. So if you're more comfortable doing things like grep and awk and sed, this is where you're going to be spending most of your time. I can't remember the last time I clicked on this in production, but I will click on it now because I'm doing a demo. We're only interested, for example, in error messages. Right? You could send anything to it, but in this case, we're going to look at error messages. We'll look at this one. Right? So we click right on there, and we can see immediately a ton of great context. The host, the service, where it's coming from, all the tags that are associated with it. Remember I was talking about cardinality, dimensions. All right? It turns out it's not just metrics. Okay? It's also logs. You can see the raw log message itself, as well as its interpretation, and finally, the error right away. The nice part about this is you don't have to go digging for it. Do I have much? How long are we on time?
A little bit more than 5 minutes.
A little bit more than 5 minutes. That's very good. Actually, that's perfect. Nice. We're glossing over stuff at a really high speed here. There's a lot going on under the hood, which I'm happy to talk about after this presentation, but I just wanted to give you sort of a taste of everything that's kind of available, right? From here, there's one or two clicks you can make where you can actually then take and look at the incident itself. So the log is nice. The log tells us something happened, and that's good, but what? Okay, it was a 500, but why? Right? We know it was a 500, but why is it a 500? So from there we can actually, and I'm cheating a bit, but from there we can actually move into the trace view. And this is the third pillar, right? Where the log goes, something happened. Okay, now it's your job to figure out what. This is why you get to be a highly paid engineer, is because it's up to you to interpret the data, right? So here we actually have the servlet request, and it takes a little over 5 seconds to complete, which, I don't know, that seems like a really long time to me, right? I mean, maybe it has some complex database query behind it, I don't know, but 5 seconds seems long. The reason I mention that is because there's another aspect of the tracing interface, which is called APM, or Application Performance Monitoring. Sometimes in some products and services, these are two separate things. In Datadog, we went, put them together. What's cool about APM is that you can use it to optimize stuff, right? So say, for example, you've got a bunch of requests, that are not errors, but they always take too long. Why? Right? Let's actually dive into that and actually take a look at every single element of the request. Querying, we got some open tracing action going on there, some Mongo query, we've got a couple of gets, HTTP gets that are then executed, so on and so forth, and you can actually see how long they take, who they were against. You can click on them to get more information, which I will do now. We can see the URL, the response, everything right here, amount of time as percentage as total request. But also, if you notice right here, we got a little exclamation point. What's that? We'll take and click on that. Oh my God, that looks terrible. Let's take a look. Turns out someone made a mistake, right? The cool part about this is now we know. We didn't have to log into a machine. We didn't have to SSH to a node, right? We didn't have to, once on that node, connect a bash process to our Docker container, and then enter the Docker container, and run a grep on a log, and realize, I'm on the wrong container, God. All right, those days are over, all right? At Datadog, we don't log into machines, okay? We just do this. In fact, the security permissions are set up so that even someone like an engineer, myself, for example, we just can't. We don't have the access to it, and even if we had access to it, we don't have the keys for it. Why? Because this. All right? So it becomes actually like a whole argument around security about like, okay, people can log into machines, and that's really cool. That's good if you're a security person. What's interesting to us is that we went from, I think there's a problem, to I know exactly what the problem is in a couple of clicks. That's actually super powerful, right? So we actually see the whole stack trace here. And remember, no stack traces and logs anymore. We're done with that. All right? Stack traces go here now. This is where we're reading them because this is where it makes sense. And that is tracing an APM in the fastest possible way I can describe it. Okay? I think we're probably pretty close to time. 2 minutes. Okay, very quickly. You can set up alerts on anything. All right? Now, set up your alerts correctly, and I've got a whole talk I do on setting up your alerts correctly, which I'm happy to expand on afterwards. But there's anomaly detection, outlier detection, forecasting. You can set it up in APM, networks. It's so good. And the last thing I want to mention is there's a relatively new feature we just deployed called Watchdog, where if you don't know what bad is, and you don't know what to set alerts on, we'll figure it out. Okay? So Watchdog helps you to figure out how to set up your alerting strategy correctly, which is actually really cool. I don't know this part super well yet, but apparently it's awesome. So I think with that, we're probably out of time.
Yeah.
I think it's break though, so feel free to go get drinks, coffee, take a break, whatever you want. If you have any questions about anything you just saw here, or if you want to talk about containers, for example, super down. Et si vous préférez parler en français, ça me m'est égal. Donc voilà. That's it. Thank you.